Hello everyone and welcome to the coding branch. I'm super excited today because we finally get to take a step outside of HTML. In this video, I'll be showing you the basics of CSS, what it's used for, why we have it, and the best practices for how to implement it. In today's video, we'll begin with an HTML document that contains an H1 that says just how much I love tacos. If you want to find access to this code, you can grab it from the GitHub link in the description below. Alright now, starting from the beginning, CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. Using CSS allows you to style your website. In the early days of the internet, to show content to users, we ended up setting up something called HTML. If you're not familiar, I do recommend checking out my playlist that will teach you HTML from scratch. But to sum it up, HTML allowed us to write documents on the internet that people all over the world can view, otherwise known as websites. Websites did not start out pretty though. It was basically just black and white text with some images and links. To be fair though, there are some small styling features built into HTML, but with tools like CSS, it's best practice to use it for styling. Alright, now let's get into styling our first website. Before getting into what's possible with CSS, we've got to know how to implement it. There are 3 common ways of implementing CSS, and to be completely honest with you, depending on what you're doing and what type of application you're writing, you may decide to use it in one way over the other, and that's completely okay. It's kind of a preference thing, but I will be sure to emphasize the most common way when we get to it. In order to style something, you'll need to know what tag you want to style. So I find it easy to start by learning Inline Css. Inline Css is written within the HTML tag it will affect. You can do this by adding an attribute called style. Within this attribute, you can declare your styles. Let's start by trying to change the color of this element and see what happens. Wow, okay, cool. It looks like changing the color basically changes the text color of the element. So let's try and change the background color instead. When declaring a color, you can use the color keywords. You can use RGB, RGBA, HSL, HSLA, or hexadecimal. Again, it's up to preference, so for now, I'll keep this nice green hex color. If you're wondering why my color is neatly highlighted, it's actually because of a really cool extension on VS Code called Color Highlight. Okay, so now we've seen how to do inline CSS, we'll move on to internal CSS. It's called internal CSS because your styles are declared inside of your HTML document. HTML actually has its own tag for CSS styles, and it's called style. Inside these style tags, we can do what we did before and change the color of our H1 tag. But we're no longer inside of the element we want to affect, so we'll have to tell our style sheet what element to affect, and for that you start with the element's name, followed by a set of brackets. And finally, within those brackets, we can declare the same things we did before. Internal styling is great if you have a really small website and want to keep everything in one document. But if you have hundreds or thousands of lines of CSS, it would soon get overwhelming inside this document, especially alongside all the HTML you would have needed in order to write that much CSS. And that, my friend, is where external CSS comes into play. CSS actually has its own file type, so we'll start by creating a file in the same directory as our HTML file called style.css. You can name it whatever you want as long as you have that file type, but you will need the name to import it into your HTML. In order to import it, we need to add a link tag inside of our head on our HTML document. This link tag needs 2 attributes in order to connect to your CSS, and that is a required attribute, which oddly enough is declared with an rel. Inside of the required tag, we'll need to tell it what kind of document we want to import, which will be a style sheet. Then we need an href attribute that acts like a source for our style sheet. If your style sheet's in the same folder as your markup, you can just add the name in quotes. We can now edit the style from the CSS file. We do this in the same way as internal CSS. Tell the CSS what element you want to affect, then add the styling inside of some brackets. Now I'll go over quite a few of the most common styling attributes just to get you acquainted with CSS, but be sure to be looking out for my future videos if you want to learn more. As we saw earlier, you can declare the text color with color, One thing to know though real quick before going too far is that you can use all forms of styling at once, though I don't recommend it. It is good to understand that your external sheet will always be overwritten by your internal CSS, and your inline CSS will overwrite your internal CSS. So if something is acting weird, that may be why. Anyway, you can also add align text to put your text in the center of the page, change your font size, font weight, and font family. The font family is essentially the font style you choose to use for your page. And this can be something on your machine, like this, or you can grab them from the web. I'll show you how to import one from Google. Go to Google Fonts, add one to the column on the right, copy that text, and voila. We've now changed your font family. You can also add a width and a height to the element. Maybe again we can add a background color and even a border. A border though will take a type, one of which is being solid, the size, and color. You can also change its border radius and even tell it to go away with display none. CSS has a ton of attributes you can change, as seen in all of the most well-designed websites. But for this video, I think we've dipped our toes into the water enough. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this type of shorthanded content, leave a like and don't forget to subscribe on your way out.